Hello, I'm male feminist Anders Bloom, and because all lives matter here at Thorin's channel, I give you a big welcome.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this one is going to be zarGoth, who is an old school Danish Counter-Strike player in the true sense of all those words, because you were there at the very beginning of Counter-Strike when the first CPLs were coming around, 2000, 2001, the very early days when we had all the great clans, NIP, Extreme 3. In Europe, obviously, we had a whole bunch of different ones. Right, here's where I'd like to start for this interview. So as I say it, since you actually are like a true old school player, you're not just one where nowadays if someone just played 1.6, technically they're old school. You know, that term just obviously becomes very, very relative and very vague. In the very beginning of Counter-Strike, I actually was around in the Quake scene just before that. And I remember when I saw Counter-Strike come up, it actually was like a grassroots game, you know. It wasn't one where nowadays, you know, like a developer releases a game and then the industry's like, right, should we switch to this game? It became an esports game because there was a billion teams playing on clan base and, you know, there was so many matches and all the public servers were full of things. So how soon actually were you involved with Counter-Strike? Were you there at the very beginning of the betas?
I was there in, I think it was called Beta 5.1. I started in late 1999. And then it started all with me playing StarCraft with a couple of guys on an internet cafe. And then suddenly I was introduced to Counter-Strike. And it just took on like a forest fire. I couldn't stop playing. And yeah, it just developed through all the betas until it was the final 1.6.
So I know one of the things that was unusual, which we have to explain to people here, is that when people had teams back then, I mean, we called them clans, but, you know, teams, so NIP, SOA, Spirit of Amiga, the one that you were in, the most famous Danish one. Like nowadays, people understand you have your 5 players, it's a professional environment. You know, if you bring a new player in, that probably means you're replacing someone. Back then, the teams used to be pretty big, right? I mean, wasn't it like 8, 9, 10 members sometimes?
Usually, yeah, you had a lot because a lot of the teams or clans was actually based around internet cafes and friends. I think SOA was one of the only few teams who actually had like 5, 6 regular players and then only 1, 2 stand-ins from time to time. But usually it was based around internet cafes and the teams and the friends you had there.
Okay. So in these early days, how did they transition from being people who play online, because obviously a lot of the initial tournaments were online before we got the CPLs, etc. How did the transition happen from just play online and you're in a top team just because you're good at the game to actually like go to events, starting the professional side of things? Was it kind of like a blurred line? Was it a quick process? How did that work?
It was kind of a blurred line because we just played to have fun, and we were one of the first teams to actually got made like an organization. So we had a manager and we had an accountant and we actually had a lawyer at our team as well. And they were the people who made it realistic with sponsors. They got us it was called IceMat at the time,
yes.
The ones that became SteelSeries at the end. And we got Microsoft as the main sponsors. And when that happened, we started being able to go out to these big tournaments. Which the first one was in CPL in Cologne, I think it was in 2000. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a blurred line because we were just playing to have fun, and we were good at it. And then suddenly we started being undefeated in Denmark, and people showed interest in the team other than just being a player, but being on the manager side and doing an effort for us to go out and compete against others.
Now, when you say sponsors there, making an organization, there was no salary at this time, right?
Not at all.
Was there ever in any of your time in Spirit of Amiga, so 2 or 3 years it was?
I actually played 6 years in Spirit of Amiga.
Okay.
But no, not at all. They paid the trips to the tournaments. We got some hardware, software, and that was about it. So we all worked besides our playing just to pay our bills for food and the internet cafe. And the travels were covered by the sponsors.
Okay.
The first real big sponsor we actually got was a Danish company, a tech company called LM Data, who they made a loan of almost 100,000 Danish kroners to be able to buy us gaming PCs.
Okay. So again, one of the things that you mentioned here, where a lot of the scene was around LAN cafes. One of the things I also found quite unusual about Counter-Strike when I came into the game as an outsider, like I'd played it, but as an esport, I was watching Quake at the time, was that I noticed that the LAN scene didn't always have the same kind of connection to the online scene. Like there was lots of very good players online. But I noticed in the early days, a lot of the top teams just picked people that like were LAN proven basically. And a lot of the really great early names were guys who almost had no transition period. Like people like Potty, Executor. If they went to a LAN, they were pretty much playing like amazing level Counter-Strike from day one. It's not like now where you get some 17-year-old kid and they're very nervous and stuff. And it seemed like back then it's kind of you kind of had to be vouched for in a way, right? If you wanted to get into a top team and go to these tournaments.
Yeah, exactly. You needed to know people. You didn't have time to prove your worth, but you needed to know the people who are on the team, basically.
Okay. And how much in the early days in a team like Spirit of Amiga, which, I mean, was one of the top teams, going to tournaments, having good placings, how much of the team, when you have a big roster, is players where, like, they're just there for the online match or they're friends and they're, like, pretty good? And how many of the players in the team are actually, like, proper best players in Denmark, world-class players? Was everyone good in the team?
Yeah, there were. We had a lot. You didn't have the roles like you have now, with you have your support and your entry fragger and all sorts of stuff like that. You had an opper, and that was about that. Now, of course, you had an in-game leader, but everyone was playing to fit in. There were no specific roles, and you just more or less you took the best you had on your hand at the internet cafe.
So one thing I mean, listen, you are welcome to disagree with this characterization if you want, but I remember actually in the early days of these CPLs, I remember those guys, the ODB guys, the guys from the Netherlands who used to go to the LANs and they used to do videos. This is when there was no YouTube, so they had to release the video and you just downloaded it like you would a frag movie, back then. And I remember your team was obviously in a bunch of them, you were in some of them. Now, at the time, I've always said this about the early days of Counter-Strike. Most teams were just players and they were just nerds. Like, the reason these guys are the best at Counter-Strike is they just sit playing Counter-Strike 12 hours a day. So every team I remember back then used to have like one or two players who had some semblance of social skills, who had some charisma, could present themselves on a camera, could talk to people from other countries, which was a big deal, depending on where you came from back then. I remember many teams, where it'd be like a German team and no one even knew them, because they just sat talking German in a corner somewhere. So in your team, it seemed like you were one of those guys, right? Who was more of a front-facing individual.
Yeah, exactly. I've always been a people guy. I love people, and I thought, well, now I'm in a position, and people actually look up to us and ask us questions. Why not spend the time on our fans? So I always answered every query I got on IRC at that point, and I was always the guy people came to with questions because I took the time to actually answer people where a lot of the other guys weren't trying to be more important. They just prioritized playing the game.
Because whenever people see old photos from that time, people do that thing, right, where if they're too young, right, and they weren't there, they think it's like the thing where, if you look at yourself in the 90s, everyone's wearing weird clothes. And I always tell them, it's not that. Like, that wasn't the fashion, what we were wearing in the early 2000s. We were all just nerds. Like, we really were the most antisocial people. We just mega at video games, right?
Yeah, exactly. We actually made a fashion show for Jack and Jones at a LAN party in Denmark with SOA, where we did a catwalk in some of their clothes.
Oh, was it a bit cringy?
It was insane. People were just laughing. So we had fun.
Sure.
But the scene wasn't ready for it.
How would you describe the type of people who were playing back then? Because obviously nowadays people can actually be very cynical and say, oh, does this player, is his heart in it? Does he just play for the money? Does he play because, he has like status, etc.? Back then, if people are making no salary and, just going to a tournament, it's like a status symbol. What type of personality do you think was drawn to being a top player back then?
Well, it was a lot of mixed people. Everyone from SOA at least, and there were 200 other big clans in the town where I live, where SOA started, the DHP, the Secret Police, and then TNB, the Network Brothers. And every single weekend, we went out, had a party, went to the net cafe and played. We were very social. We didn't just hide inside our cave and stay there with our friends. We actually went out and were very social.
So obviously, one of the things that's always been a problem in Counter-Strike is we've had very, very poor anti-cheat in the professional scene for many of the early years. Like, I still remember when they tried to implement that punk buster thing that was like pretty badly done. It would automatically, you would just kick people randomly, you know. So it didn't work. Yeah. And obviously at the time, what people would now think of as VAC was like basically non-existent. And even, you know, the simple cheat you can download did work. So
yeah, you just relied on people.
Yeah, so the reason I'm getting to this is because people would be shocked to find out there was a lot of people back then who were very good players. You know, they could go to LAN and be very good, who either were using some form of cheats or, at a very minimum, using dodgy configs, right?
Do you remember the Clan C from Finland?
Yes, the Finnish guys.
Yeah, we actually got them disqualified from CPL in Amsterdam. Yeah, Amsterdam, because they were cheating during the tournament. They were every time a player died, they'll tap out and do something in the DOS prompt. And we saw it from the cafeteria behind the players. We actually got them disqualified because they were cheating during the tournament itself.
If people were doing that, what, like, within the player side of the community, obviously, like, fans hit stuff like, you know, they're just going to come down very harshly on it. But within the actual group of players, was that, like, tolerated if it was an online match? Like, some people were just going to use configs anyway. Did the LAN players, like, look down on players who did that? What was kind of the sentiment?
Not really, because it wasn't that big of a deal back then. We didn't know who cheated and who didn't. And after the event, well, they still played good, even though they didn't use their cheat. So you didn't really freeze them out, or they got a bad reputation from the fans or anything. It was kind of weird. But then again, we were all friends. The reason we played back then wasn't for the fame, the glory, and the money, because there weren't any. Sure. But it was because we were good friends. We were 5-6 good friends on the team, traveling the world with plus 60, 100 other friends, having a great time, a blast, playing some computer and drinking beers.
So a question I have about you, right, is about the scene in Denmark at the time, like as a country, aside from Counter-Strike. Because whenever people ask me about different Scandinavian countries, okay, so obviously Sweden's the most famous because it's had the most success and it had all those great sort of lineage teams that could keep replacing players, but the similar core remained. Like, Finland's its own thing. I'm not even sure that should be counted. You know, it's like an alien zone where I don't even know what's going on to this day, and I lived there one time. No. But this is the part that's bizarre, right? Is Denmark's obviously kind of in between Sweden and the others because it's had a lot of success in its own right, not quite until CSGO on the level of Sweden. But here's what's weird, right? Whenever everyone talks about and bemoans the lack of Norwegian players and Norwegian orgs, because famously they had some very good players, but a lot of them had to play in teams outside of Norway. They didn't really have as many teams. They had very few orgs. What everyone always says, right, as kind of a very simplistic reason as to why they didn't have a great scene is like, oh, well, you know, the cost of living is very high there, and, you know, people just have to go and get a job or go and do university or something. But shouldn't that apply to Denmark as well? I mean, Denmark's, it's a fairly expensive place to live to some degree. You know, if you're not making no salary, how do people manage to be pro players?
Well, we live in a welfare society in Denmark. We pay almost 50% in taxes, but everything is accounted for, so we don't have to worry about the doctor's bill, going to the hospital. Okay. All those sorts of everyday things is covered. So we have a lot of more accessibility to computers and internet than the other countries have, and that's why I think that we had a lot of success with Danish teams back then, and a lot of talent, because we were able to actually have the internet connections and the computers to do it.
So from the latter days of 1.6 with people like MTW and Ave and Zonic, and then coming into CSGO with Astralis and then the North team with MSL, Denmark's most famous quality in Counter-Strike is being very tactical, having, like, you know, very well set up teams where people know their roles. It's not very freeform like some of the Swedish teams were. Was it like that in the early days in Denmark and Counter-Strike? Was that something that had developed at that point?
Yeah, actually it was. We spent a lot of time, mostly I think it was Crash Jack in the first generation, who had a lot of crazy ideas, which were translated into tactics that we actually tried and it worked. There was other teams who used a lot of FFA strategies, trying to outsmart the opponent, but it didn't work. But I think the established teams like TNB, DHB, who was more dynamic crew, and Animus, they actually implemented a lot of strategy and tried to develop tactics for both the defense and the offense in the game.
Okay. So you mentioned him there. This is a player I wanted to talk about. Is Crashjack, obviously the iconic leader of Spirit of Amiga. Now, this is someone where in the early days, obviously he was a key part of a bunch of these lineups, but I remember when they did that sort of like civil war where half the team left and made the level squad, part of the reason why, as far as I remember, was because they didn't get along with Crashjack for some reason. Some sort of a collision there. So what was he like as a person, as a leader, and why was this eventual fracture take place?
Well, he's a special person. He lives and breathes for SOA. He has the brand today, and they're playing PUBG, but not on the same level as SOA back then. But it's his bread and butter. Sorry, and he couldn't really take that other people wanted to develop the brand and make decisions without his approval. And that just doesn't work if you're in a professional organization and you have to lead a team. It happened another time after the level where we made the team temporary. It was, we left Jag alone. He was the only player left in SOA. That was the last lineup we had before Sui took over in 2008, I think. But we wanted to bench him because he wasn't simply good enough.
Yes.
We wanted to give him high status, blah, 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 position in the team, but we weren't going to use him in the lineup because he wasn't delivering and playing good enough. And he couldn't accept that, and then it was just a civil war, and we ended up saying, well, then we're going to take the sponsors, everything, and we're going to leave and do our own team. And that was with the management of the lawyer and the accountant, and the first really established organization we had.
So I remember at this point in time, another detail that might surprise people is there weren't that many super young players back then because, you know, to own a really good internet connection, to have time to be able to go to events, you probably need a job, you probably need, you know, there's a lot of factors that you need to be able to have a lifestyle like this. But one of the players I remember was an up and coming player who seemed like he was one of the talents, was a guy called Muggs, right? I'm sure you remember this guy. Who was this guy?
Sebastian DeLucci, one of my favorite players. This small, a bit insecure guy, but he always did what he could to be in the center. He was making jokes, he was dancing around, fooling around, and I was amazed about his level of concentration during the game because his only goal in the game was to make a headshot. That was what he was playing for. So he was just a great guy. He understood, he had a really good game sense and understood how the game was supposed to be played.
Okay.
And he had a good friend, Afflictor, who was playing in SOA as well. And he wasn't the best player in the world, but he was the most stable one we had. Actually, you can always rely on Afflictor. So they were a good duo to have on the team because he was the lone wolf, ranger, cowboy, just running around doing headshots, and Afflictor was the one cleaning up afterwards.
So, and people might this will be on YouTube, I've no doubt. That classic song that Kim Rom had commissioned, where he got that rapper to make the ALX Denmark to Dallas song. By the way, I still think it's straight fire. Like if you know what the references are back then, it's actually a pretty catchy track. Did everyone love it in Denmark as well? Was it considered just a comedy track? Do people actually like it?
No, but people loved it. We actually got a lot of props worldwide because we did a lot of credit for CPL, Angel Moons, Pesticide, all those guys behind the big tournaments, and they thought it was cool, so they put it on their FTP server and actually made some marketing for it and sharing it with people in the US and stuff. So it went worldwide and people loved it.
So the guy I said who did this, obviously the manager of the team, Kim Rom, is someone who later on played many different roles. He was the Steel Series as a top executive. He actually was my boss at one point in time at a big esports website a few years ago. I won't tell any stories there, but all I will say is this: he's a bit of a crazy guy, right? Yeah,
he is. He's a salesperson. He's good at what he's doing. He's good at what he's doing, and he always sticks to his sports. So he doesn't promise anything he can't keep, which we had some incidents on the scene at that point.
Okay,
with other people at least.
So I remember another detail that was quite bizarre about the early days of the Spirit of Amiga team was, as we referenced earlier, there was a lot of talent in Denmark. There was a lot of teams. There was a lot of players playing at LAN cafes, etc. So why at some of the first CPLs did we see this Danish team with a Norwegian guy? All of a sudden, Executor was there, who at the time was a very weird figure, because if you remember, he didn't have he had like ISDN or something, so he didn't even have a good internet connection. So this is an example of a player who's just LAN proven, right? That's why you got to have him on your team. Could he actually speak any Danish though? Was the crossover decent enough?
It was English all the way. We didn't understand Norwegian, so.
Sure, I don't think anyone does. What was he like in the game though?
He was very aggressive. And I think it plays along great with his personality, because he's very dedicated and wants to do good. So he was lift for the moral in the game, because he was always pushing to do better. And then he was just an excellent player.
So obviously the core team that people remember from this era is the team that was there, Ninjas in Pajamas guys. Some of them later on went to be SK Gaming and obviously built a really great legacy there. Like, this is an example of a squad where, as I alluded to earlier, people like Potty, it feels like from day one that they went to the LAN tournaments that they never had any warm-up period. They were just the best players immediately.
Yeah.
Was this squad, like, in practice and stuff like this behind the scenes, was it very competitive? Were they as far ahead as they looked when they were winning some of the CPLs and, they were doing it like without losing a map, etc.?
It felt like they were always 2 steps ahead. No matter what strategy you had and how good you were playing, they would always have something new that no one else had thought about. So they were way ahead of the time at that point.
In the early versions of Counter-Strike, I mean, I have my own theory on this, which people have heard many times. Do you think that you could kind of like individually shine a bit more in the old versions as opposed to some of the later updates?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could, because now it's much more structured and tactical than it was back then. So you had a lot of other opportunities to actually shine and do your one-man show if it was needed. And we weren't that strict, but like we didn't have any roles on the team. So it was like, okay, we're going to do a split B. And then the 3 persons closest to B were just the persons who went that way, and the 2 left were going the other way. There weren't no dedicated strategy for what was going to do. We had a plan, say, okay, split B, and then we stormed B. And it was first later on in the scene that you actually started doing fakes. The first couple of years, it was always, okay, split B, then you just ran ahead. You didn't have smoke grenades, you didn't have Molotov, so it didn't have a lot of strategic things you could use to stop an attack, other than flashbangs.
Okay. So even though, as I alluded to before, with all this Danish talent, there was a lot of teams which kept their core for a certain point in time and, went a very long time. But there was one guy who was a bit of a nomad in the scene, I remember, which was, of course, Vicon, because he was a player who was in Spirit of Amiga, but then he was over playing with Game Online, and then he was later on with the Level. He went in a bunch of different teams. Who was this guy?
He was the small guy from a small town in Denmark. And when they came into SOA, it was him and Adaman, another great player he was a stable player, but not the best in the world. But he was solid on your team because he just brought stability. But Vicon, he was just a beast. He was a Mux version 2, trying to be the best, no matter what it took. He wanted to be the best. He wanted to be the one that took the show on the server. He's actually still playing. He's playing CS:GO now, but not on any big teams, just a casual.
Okay. It sounds like a lot of people still like every now and then dip in and try and play a little bit, and they want to see if they can be as good, right?
Yeah, and they're not. I think that the scene back then were easier to be good at. If you catch my drift, it wasn't that demanding like it is now, that you have a lot more players and a larger talent pool and a lot of different other ways to train yourself than you had back then. The way I got into SOA is quite of a weird story. I was playing on another internet cafe in Odense, the town where I lived, and I was working at McDonald's that time, and a guy called Søren started working there, and we spoke after a couple of shifts, and he was playing Counter-Strike on another cafe. He was called Daywalker. I don't know if you recall him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he invited me to go to this internet cafe Millennium and play with his guy Soa. So I went up there, played one day, and they had an official match. And he said, "Could you change your name to Evil Flame and play as this character because he's not here, but we need a last player." And then I played, and I actually don't recall if we won or not. But then the day after, I went to my own internet cafe, and the guys I was playing with there say that they joined another team, and I asked them how come. And they said, "Well, you're a part of SOA, haven't you heard?" And I said, "Who the fuck is SOA?" But that was how he got in. That was from day 1 to day 2, I was part of SOA. And that was simply because I was working with a guy on McDonald's who happened to play for SOA.
Okay. So one of the things back then is the first CPLs that we had in Europe, unfortunately, were way lower prize pools than the American ones, which were kind of like the big World Championship major types thing. I mean, if you won one of these things, you might get like 7,000 euros for the whole team. So even if you were the champions like NIP or whatever, you definitely weren't living a high lifestyle. So did it actually, for a team like yours, was it considered prestigious to be able to go to the American tournaments and to play like the big money competitions?
It was not to win the money, but mostly because it was a large international with the best teams, and to be able to represent your country was the biggest deal. Being able to be Denmark at an international tournament was great. That was what we did. We didn't go there to win prize money, or of course you'd like to win, but that wasn't the main course why we went. That was simply to participate with the best, because the competition in Denmark weren't that great. So it was nice to actually get your skills tested.
How would you describe what it was like when you went to one of those CPLs that was in Dallas? What was the atmosphere like? What was the setup like?
It was great. It was always held on the Hyatt Hotel, so it was there was this huge venue with. They had a lot of stuff that you didn't see in CPL Amsterdam or in Europe, at least. It felt enormous. And way more professional than you'd see anywhere here in Europe.
Right. One thing that I think would shock a lot of pro players today, and I often tell some of this, like, obviously people only can see their own circumstances. So when a lot of pro players complain to me that like, oh, like we had to play too many matches, we had to come back next day in the morning. I often tell them, like, if you go and look at the format at those old CPLs, first of all, there was no pick ban. You just played the map that was that round of the tournament. So if you met a team that you would normally beat, but they're good on one map, and that happens to be the map that you meet them in round 4 or whatever, bad luck. You better just win that map. And then also, it was best of 1 double elimination. If you remember, if you went to the lower bracket, because there's so many games to do, you were just playing games all in a row there. You were just doing game after game after game, straight in the next game, right?
Yeah, 12 hours straight. There was no mercy. And you didn't use the MR15 rule. You had the chargers only. So you played 2 times half an hour on the T side or on the CT side. Yeah. So if you knew that you were going to beat the team and you would win 100%, you still had to play an hour.
Yes, exactly, because obviously it's like it was more like an American football game or something. Until the clock runs out, it doesn't matter how far ahead you are. You have to play till the time runs out. Yeah, that's true.
But how was the Chargers only? It was the ones who got the most rounds.
It was the one who had the most T rounds.
Yeah, T rounds. Yeah, that might be.
So CT was just about shutting them down, which actually was kind of cool, because if you remember, in fact, actually, I'll see if you remember this. There was a game at CPL London that SOA played against SK, the German team. And actually, I think it was on DOS 2 or something. There was like an epic game like this where, because it was Chargers only, Prodigy, there we go. Well, what happened is, I think SK won in the end. It was like a very close game, but it was where, because they had, you had a certain number of rounds, but then I think you were on the CT side second, you have to, the tension is, can you hold them from getting to the amount of rounds that you have? Because at that point, you can't score any more rounds. So I always thought it was a very interesting, viewer dynamic, Yeah,
it was. I've been rooting for getting a tournament with Chargers only again, because it would be fun to see.
Sure.
And we actually, the game I was thinking about was against SK in the CPL Berlin, where we were actually able to get them disqualified because they killed their last man 2 times by jumping off the rail. Because he was charging around after us, and we were 4 man left, and it took 3-4 minutes, and then he jumped off and killed himself, and you could get disqualified for doing that.
Okay.
But we decided to play on, and then he did it again. And yeah, we were going to win anyway, so we played the game and had fun. But yeah, I like the chapters only because for first you had a lot more fun because you were able to do the things we did where you actually played hide and seek to be able to hide from the other competitors of the other players. But you also had a larger, what do you call it? Or you had an easier time actually gaining a deficit if you were behind a lot because you could change your strategy for storming somewhere and just go through and pile up 6, 4, 7 rounds in a couple of minutes.
What was the actual practice scene like back then? Like, could you always play against the other top European teams? Were there some teams that they just wouldn't practice against other squads? Like, for example, if you want to play against the NIP guys, could you always get practices? Was it easy enough to organize?
Yeah, it was. In Scandinavia, we didn't have any problems, but it was usually a problem playing against teams in other parts of Europe because the internet connections were so bad. So in the start, you only played against teams from your own country. I remember when we were, I think it was 58-0 on clan base in Denmark. We were sitting on a dual ISDN connection, and the others had something worse. So we weren't able to play against teams outside Denmark. So we practiced a lot against Fragfest from, I think they were Swedish.
Makes sense.
Because they were sitting on Telia's backbone connection, something. So they were able to actually play with a good connection in Denmark.
When you first went to the American tournaments, did the Americans have a different style of play or philosophy to Counter-Strike?
Yeah, it was. I think it was more unorganized. Like they were a step behind. They were still doing some charges only strategies where other teams from Europe had started implementing strategies for MR15 or 16, sorry.
12. It was 12 back then.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's true.
Yes.
MR 12. It's been a while. But yeah, I actually think that they had a lot of other strategies that were used from the charges only that they didn't renew, but they only made some adjustments to it to try to fit it into the new way of playing.
So one thing that I think is often lost for people who don't know the history of esports is that in the early days when we had these CPLs and things like that were really good, obviously there was like the .com bubble crash where the whole internet, everyone was like, right, no one's ever going to make money off that, abandon it. Like people really thought like it was just never going to become a big thing. Did you actually have like a vision that Counter-Strike would keep getting bigger, or esports would keep getting bigger, or something would continue on and eventually, not necessarily to the level it is now, that's a bit nuts, but that things would keep getting bigger? Did it seem like there was an upward trajectory? Yeah,
we actually did. We worked a lot at SOA to be able to try to move it from a subculture to something acceptable by the parents at least. And we worked, even though we had this crash, we still tried to push on, showing the scene from other sides, like what all the positive sides from video games would be, like the health and your cognitive learning abilities and all these sorts of stuff. And I actually think that a lot of that prepared the scene more and were able to keep the foundation as it was until it actually came out of the hole.
Okay. When you got to the point later on in your career where you transitioned out of being player yourself, and then as time goes on, drift out of the scene somewhat. Did you keep in touch with Counter-Strike? Did you still check up on what was going on in the tournaments? Did you just go off to another life? How did you come back at some point in time?
I think after my time in SOA, I went to Fate to Black Kapow, another Danish team who had Lancelot and Sonic among others, and acted like their coach for half a year. And then I just totally cut the strings, sold my computer, and was in November 2014 when CSGO came out. I actually started following the scene again, because I met Heaton and Forrest at Elgiganten, a large electronics company in Denmark. They had 1-versus-1 shootout. Come and do your best. And I went to meet them, and actually Heaton gave me Counter-Strike Go and said, we need to play this a bit. And from then on, I started to follow every tournament, being a fanboy, and starting to see a lot of the aspects and sides that we've been fighting for all the time blossom, and found my passion for the game again, not as a player, but more as an organizer and not as a manager, but I wanted to keep developing the scene. So I've started educating on school, educating in Counter-Strike Go. I'm doing lectures, I'm doing presentations for companies about the scene, from a subculture to a $1 million industry. I'm doing a lot of different projects and things within esports, trying to promote it and try to make it more acceptable. Trying to make mostly the parents keep up with this Narnia that just opened up a couple of years ago.
Sure. So what was young Zonic like then?
He was like he was this laid back guy. He was aggressive during the game. Not aggressive. He had temper, but he was this big, like he's now, big smiling guy. Gave hugs. His mom makes the biggest pork chops I've ever had. He was nice and kind, but a very dedicated, very motivated, and often a player with too much temper. He broke a couple of mouses and stuff, but he was a good guy. He was his learning abilities, both as a player but also to teach others, were great, and he was very good at adapting to the game.
Right, this will sound like a weird question. This is another cultural question. So a lot of the people who are the most famous Danish players, because the teams are very tactical and they're about, like, you know, play your role, don't have like a big ego, and also people like Zonic, like these are nice guys, you know, they're not really like trash talkers, and they're not really people who have like the big personality. So as a result, I think a lot of people who don't know Scandinavia make the classic mistake, which I know all Danes would emphasize, don't ever make this mistake, which is Danish people aren't like Swedish people. Like, ignore the history there. It's very different. So what the point I'm getting to here is Swedish people famously are fairly bland like that, you know, like if they're great in the game, they really are just like, just did the headshot, you know, like there's not like a great lot of personality with a lot of them. So even though, like I say, some of the Danish players had that, I've known for a long time, and especially from knowing some of the people in Source and some of the players more casually, Denmark actually has a sense of humor that's very different from Swedish. In fact, that's why I connect to it a bit, because it kind of reminds me of some of the British humor, where it's like pretty dark and there's a lot of fucked up kind of elements to the humor, you know. And what I'm going to get to here is, people only have seen this in CSGO from Config, because he actually has come forward and done a bit of shit talking, and he's been kind of a bit feisty. So how would you describe like Danish culture in that sense? Like, what's like the subculture aspects of like what young people are like, or what gamers are like?
Well, we have a freedom of speech in Denmark, so everything is acceptable. As you said, we have a dark sense of humor. Like, you have what's it called? Not Mr. Bean. He's not that dark. But the Monty Python, some of their shows. What's it called? The one with Snake, Black Snake, like
Blackadder.
Yeah, exactly. We love black humor. Not like black people, but we like dark
humor. Yes.
Yeah, dark humor. And it's something we're born with, and we actually it can become a problem with youngsters in Denmark, because you see a lot of them acting like smart asses online, but they're not standing behind their words if you go offline, and that's a good thing, but it's still a problem because they're not told completely what's wrong and what's right, because we have this freedom of speech and can do or say almost whatever we want.
Because, I mean, for me, the way that I've seen that unfortunately manifest sometimes is that that's all cool, obviously, for you with your friends, it's in private. But the problem is when someone's like 17, 18, and they become an esports pro out of nowhere, and they don't realize that, like, it's not about anymore what's acceptable in Denmark. It's about all the sponsors are in America and this worldwide audience, you know. And so things are going to get taken the wrong way.
It is. I mean, you have a larger fan base as it is today. So back then it was more acceptable because it was still a subculture, and the people who were actually your fans were at the same place you were in some part. But now you have the parents, you have the sponsors, the investors, you have a lot of other segments which can take damage of the things that you say as a person, even though it might be for fun, but it can be interpreted in other ways in other countries.
Were you actually someone who had an Amiga back in the day?
Yeah, of course.
Because, you know, even though now, obviously, because of Counter-Strike, that name is legendary, it was a sick name from day one if you actually were someone who had an Amiga, because obviously it was like a classic gaming machine, you know, before PCs were really games. It was the shit, wasn't it?
It was. Amiga 500, it was the bomb. Playing Sid Meier's all night long.
Yeah, Civilization, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the game. That was the famous one where it was like one more turn, and then you just play for 6 more hours, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what about this then? So another interesting part about the early days of games like Counter-Strike is you had a lot of people playing. Well, like I said, they just happened to be the best players. You know, they didn't like dedicate their life like it was a sport because no one knew it was. So one of the things that I wanted to ask was this. In the early days, if you, for example, in Quake, well, the first 3 Quakes each came out like, you know, a year or 2 years apart from each other. So if you were a Quake player, you were used to knowing, right, well, this version of the game probably won't last very long. Right, I'll switch to the next one when that comes out. But Counter-Strike as a game actually lasted at the pro level for like 12 years or something. Yeah. We've had CSGO for like 6 years or so like pretty long period of time. Was there actually any sense in the scene early on that it was going to be a game that lasted a long time? Did you think to yourself, maybe I'll just play it for a year? Like, where was your head at in terms of that?
But the thing is, back then, you mostly played to have fun with your friends. You didn't see it as a competitive sport as it is now. So you just played the game as it was and tried to adapt to it, because we still had fun playing the game. And that was the whole point of playing. So we didn't do it in the same competitive sense as you do now. And you couldn't really see and say when the updates would come. They would just drop from time to time when they had some changes. And we played as the game was because we had fun doing it.
Right. I had a theory back in Counter-Strike 1.6 that one of the reasons why a lot of top pros who retired for a few years often tried to do like the comeback, you know, where they for 6 months they go and join like an up-and-coming team, and they tell everyone in interviews like, no, I'm going to come back to the top again. My theory for that often was that, you know, you get bored of the game eventually, or you get bored of competing, you know, fair enough, and you think, right, I'll go with my life. But the problem is when you go to the real world, you're just another pleb. You're just nobody again, and you realize, wait, fuck. As much as it was annoying, like I was kind of a superstar. Like, you know, people knew who I was. Like, it was meaningful. So here's the question, right? Nowadays, I'm sure you're not going to be offended by this. If we line up a bunch of people for Counter-Strike fans, they're not going to know who the original Counter-Strike players are. Even a lot of the top pro players aren't going to know. Does it kind of suck a bit that like you don't get the status of like, I was a legendary player, I was at the beginning of the game?
Yeah, at some point it does, because you want to get credit for the things that you actually achieved. But it wasn't really developed at that point, the industry. So I can understand why they don't know who people are from back then, because maybe the industry or the history doesn't interest them that much. But yeah, you should make some sort of, like they did with the Hall of Fame now, where Heaton was inducted and stuff like that. You could take a lot of other old players and actually induct those top players into the Hall of Fame, so people would, there would be shed some light on them, and people would actually start to interest them for the history of the industry and the game itself. Because we didn't do it for the fame and the glory, but I know a lot of the guys I played together with, we feel that we did a shitload of work for the industry and trying to build and establish what we actually have today. And I think that's what people want some credit for if they ever think about it.
Sure. So another aspect that I want to ask about is I notice whenever I do interviews now, like in the last few years with people who played a long time ago, one of the lovely things about memory is they tend to just nostalgically remember all the great times, you know, the great players, the things. Was there an aspect to the industry that like was off-putting, or like people didn't pay, or it was difficult to get certain business? Was there an aspect that was kind of a pain in the arse?
Don't get me started. Well, first of all, mostly, let's say 99% of all tournaments had problems paying out the prize pool. You can wait up till 3 years to get your prize money. and you had a lot of managers who promised you gold in the forest and everything else, and they couldn't keep their promise. We had an accident. We had a manager in SOA called Blue Fox, and he was actually the reason why SOA and Level, I can't remember if there were a third team, but SOA and Level at least were stranded in the Copenhagen airport for 2 days on our way to CPL in Dallas. Because he told us that he had a sponsor. He actually made fake documents with the company's stamp and tickets, and he just kept saying, yeah, well, the tickets are on the way. And we were 15 men waiting in the airport, and it was just a lie.
How did that resolve then? You just had to pay your own tickets or something?
No, we didn't go. It was too late.
Better.
They even postponed the games at the CPL to be able to give us a chance to come. But yeah, we never did. We waited there for 2 days and they weren't able to postpone it anymore.
Okay. Right. What about at the end of the interview? Do you have a final message for young people coming up watching this, or people, maybe the old farts who actually do remember this era? Do you have a parting word for us?
I don't have for the youngsters. Maybe involve your parents more. My theory is that if we need to get this industry to blossom more and get more stable, we need to get the parents' approval from home. And that's what I'm working a lot on with my lectures. So make them become a part of your game to make it a great success for both parts, and make them share your passion, more or less. And for the old farts like me, get back and get into it. It's fun.
Okay, Manga Tak.
You're welcome, Rent.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.